and lovers.
I need to tell you something.
They're all playing the field.
And that look.
Tomorrow at 9:30 on BBC One.
I'm Laird of Glenbogle.
From City Slicker
Your father.
Nasty accident, dear.
Do you have to go?
to Monarch of the Glen.
This is him, isn't it?
It wasn't until the wild woman of the woods started rearranging my arms and legs.
Life's never going to be the same again for Archie MacDonald.
I do not want to be a laird.
What gives you the right to expect everything to be the way you want it?
New drama starring Richard Briers
You must be Hector MacDonald.
Sir, do you?
and Susan Hampshire.
Must you be so rude?
Bad behaviour is one of the few privileges of old age.
Blood relations, but worlds apart.
You'll be staying then, I take it? No!
Monarch of the Glen, coming in February to BBC One.
Training is over and the recruits are in the army for real. Soldiers to be in half an hour. The BBC News at 9 now on BBC One Scotland with George Alagaya.
Hijackers release 8 passengers from the Afghan plane at Stansted Airport. As the plane sits on the tarmac tonight, their demands are still unclear. The government is facing a Lord's defeat over plans to repeal Section 28. The man from Disneyland in Paris comes over to rescue the dome. Good evening. Nearly 160 people are still being held hostage tonight aboard a hijacked Afghan airliner at Stansted Airport in Essex. Police say they're determined to end the crisis peacefully and have been negotiating throughout the day in English with the hijackers. Earlier, 8 people were released. It's still unclear what the hijackers are demanding. The plane took off yesterday morning from the Afghan capital, Kabul, on a domestic flight. After several stops, including Moscow, it landed at Stansted at 2 o'clock this morning. Our chief news correspondent, Kate Adie, is there.
There have been few outward signs of the ordeal being undergone by the passengers. The Boeing 727 is tucked into a corner of Stansted Airport, well away from the main runway. However, it's being watched and circled by the special forces who might be called on if the situation were to deteriorate, with the lives of 150 people at risk. People who've spent well over 24 hours cooped up in the cramped cabin of a Boeing 727. The passengers and crew should have spent a mere hour on a flight between 2 Afghan cities yesterday. Instead, they found themselves embarked on a grim shuttle, ending up at Stansted Airport just after 2 this morning. Ariana Airlines, far from home, taxied past a large number of emergency vehicles, which had quickly gathered following well-rehearsed procedures specific to this airport. The Afghan plane had unexpectedly headed to London from Moscow, and its weary and presumably frightened passengers found themselves looking at the Essex countryside. A handful of people had been allowed off in Russia and Uzbekistan, but the plane was still very full, with 23 children on board. During the day, one good sign was that negotiators had been able to talk to the plane in English and alleviate some of the conditions on board. A generator, some tea and soft drinks, baby food and toiletries. A Land Rover crept up with the requested supplies. But any political demands the hijackers may have made have not been put to the British police.
I'm not aware of any other requests that have been made by the people on board the aircraft. As far as I know, at this time, the only requests that have been made are for food, fresh water, medical supplies and equipment.
Mid-morning, a family of 4 plus another man were released. Then the police said negotiations were at a critical stage, but didn't explain. Meanwhile, Stansted Airport has functioned in a restricted manner, with some flights cancelled. But later, officials said that the airport was 90% operational. Hot food was taken up the rear steps of the plane this afternoon, and 3 more passengers released. Otherwise, there was little obvious activity, and with the plane unlikely to fly off, British policy is to deal with the situation here. Hours of continued negotiation lie ahead. Not surprisingly, the physical conditions on board the aircraft have been described as difficult. However, the family who came off this morning said they had been well treated. But little has emerged about the mood of the hijackers, whether or how they are armed, and what their intentions are. Kate Adey, BBC News, Stansted.
It's still not clear exactly who the hijackers are or even who they're acting for. Rival factions in Afghanistan have traded claims and denials about which group is holding the hostages. It's thought one of the hijackers' key demands is the release of an opposition leader being held by the Islamic Taliban authorities inside Afghanistan.
Afghanistan has always been fought over. It's still in the grip of civil war. And the Taliban, who now control most of the country, own the Stansted plain. The hijackers seem to be allied to the anti-Taliban forces, still clinging on to a corner of the country. And it's the release of one of their military heroes the hijackers apparently demand. Ismail Khan has spent half a lifetime at war, but then Ismail Khan was captured and imprisoned in 1997. He's still the Taliban's greatest prize.
Last year he nearly died in jail. The Taliban refused to let doctors see him. He's frail, he's 60 years old, he's not keeping good health. And these hijackers could well be his clan members, members of his family, or his supporters.
The Taliban must be expected to keep hold of their most celebrated prisoner. They have successfully destroyed what they see as Western decadence. The Taliban is shunned by most of the outside world and accused of supporting terrorism. But now it's the Taliban's enemies who are linked to the hijacking, leaving them as friends of the West, trying to disown the hijackers.
Our movement have never been involved in such activities. Not only that we have not been involved, but we have all the time opposed this sort of terrorist activity. That's a total terrorist activity. We have opposed it in the past, we are opposing it now, and we will oppose it in the future.
Whoever the hijackers really are, it was the success of another hijack which may have given them the idea. Last December, an Indian Airlines plane was forced to fly to Afghanistan. The hijackers freed their hostages after India did release 3 Kashmiri militants from jail. But Britain insists the hijackers at Stansted have made a big mistake. The government never makes concessions, never allows hijackers to go free. Still, the politics of this case are extremely complex. Afghanistan's embassy here in London is home not to the Taliban, not recognised by Britain, but to the Afghan opposition, strenuously denying any links to the hijackers. All this leaves the authorities relying on negotiation without concession to try to end the hijack peacefully. James Robbins, BBC News, at Afghanistan's embassy in London.
The RUC has said last night's bomb attack at an hotel in County Fermanagh was aimed at causing maximum destruction. The explosion, which has been claimed by a Republican splinter group, has been condemned by politicians on all sides who said it was deliberately timed to undermine the peace process as it enters this critical stage.
There were no injuries and the damage was limited, but yet again, those who only believe in the bomb and the bullet struck specifically and deliberately against the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, and the expressed will of the people of Ireland, north and south, for an end to violence. The police swept the area around Mahon's Hotel in Irvinstown. The key question: what were the 4 pounds of high explosive used by the self-styled Continuity IRA? If it was Semtex, that's only been in the hands of the IRA. In any event, unionists felt the attack reinforced their argument about the necessity for decommissioning.
The people who really must make a move are the Provisional IRA. They're the people who have the vast quantities of arms and explosives. And I suppose the only thing I can say about what happened last night is that it vindicates those of us who understand why arms and explosives have to be taken out of the equation.
The main nationalist leader called on the IRA to dump some of its stock of Semtex.
I would like to see them at the present point making a certain gesture that would demonstrate that they're totally committed to decommissioning and to disarmament, as they have said they are.
Sinn Féin angrily dismissed that idea, and the party's president and Stormont for a meeting with the Northern Ireland Secretary Peter Mandelson warned yet again of the consequences of suspending devolution.
If the British government actually move so that they are in default of an agreement, and actually move to suspend institutions that are part of that agreement, then they have to ask themselves what comes after that.
The Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Mandelson, is the man who'll have to weigh the consequences and take the decision to suspend or not. He was attending a function to celebrate the Chinese New Year, but he'll have that suspension power by Thursday night, and he'd probably exercise it on Friday. Loyalist demonstrators heckled the Ulster Unionist Party's executive as it met to discuss the proposed changes in the RUC. The party's ministers won't resign over that, but they will if the IRA's position on decommissioning doesn't change. To avoid that, the government's likely to suspend devolution. Not a good option, but preferable to the complete collapse resignations would produce. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
The Department of Trade and Industry has asked police to investigate allegations that the engineering company founded by the former Labour Minister Geoffrey Robinson made fraudulent claims for government grants. DTI papers relating to Transtech, which went into receivership last year, have been handed to West Midlands Police.
The police will look at allegations made by this man, Max Aris, a former Transtech employee. Last week he delivered a bundle of documents to the Department of Trade and Industry. He said they supported his allegations that Transtech, under the direction of Geoffrey Robinson, made fraudulent claims for government grants. In a statement today, the DTI said it had handed over to the West Midlands Police information relating to grant payments made by the department to subsidiaries of Transtech plc. It continued, the West Midlands Police will now conduct any further interviews which may be necessary and decide what action to take. The West Midlands Force polices the area where many of Transtech's businesses were based. Transtech went into receivership just before Christmas. Tonight, Geoffrey Robinson welcomed the police investigation. He blamed the allegations, which he denies, on grudges held by former employees. As well as a police investigation, Transtech faces an inquiry by Department of Trade inspectors into separate matters concerning the company's collapse just before Christmas. The scrutiny of Transtech and its founder, Geoffrey Robinson, continues to intensify. Greg Wood, BBC News, at the Department of Trade and Industry.
And in the last few minutes, the government lost the vote to repeal a law which prevents local authorities from promoting homosexuality in schools. By 210 votes to the government's 165, that's a majority of 45, the House of Lords decided that Section 28 of the Local Government Act should remain. Supporters of the law say it enhances the status of traditional marriage. Opponents claim Section 28 encourages homophobia and bullying in schools.
The government's plans to scrap Section 28 have been fought by campaigners who feared its removal would see young people subjected to a barrage of gay propaganda, undermining family life. In the Lords today, they argued that while adults must be free to make their own choices on sexuality, the young had to be protected.
The centre of this debate is children. Children in schools. Children who, in my opinion, ought not to be treated as if they were adults and in a position to make an informed choice about alternative lifestyles about which they cannot possibly have the experience to judge.
In an intense and procedurally complicated debate, the government supporters insisted that teachers needed the law changed to be able to counter bullying in schools. Section 28, they argued, encouraged discrimination.
The repeal of Section 28 is a true test of our moral courage. If we teach our children that gay young men or women, or black young men and women, or Asian young men or women, or Jewish young men and women are moral outsiders, then how, my lords, can we expect them to grow up without prejudice and hate?
Church leaders have been warning ministers against placing homosexual relationships on a par with marriage. They won early assurances that teachers would be given guidelines requiring them to support marriage and not to promote a particular sexual orientation. But rebels on the government benches joined the protests.
The compassion and belief in people, which is a hallmark of a Labour government, reflects my profound feeling. But in this, I think they are wrong. I have not so far voted against the Labour government, but in this, I shall vote for Amendment 365.
In the end, the government was comfortably defeated in the vote on the key amendment.
My Lords, they have voted contents 210,
not Contents 165, so the Contents have it.
That will anger the gay rights campaigners protesting at Westminster tonight, and for the government it's a considerable embarrassment. Ministers say Section 28 is a bad law which must be repealed, and that they won't give up as a result of tonight's defeat. They promised more talks with church leaders, and they'll try to reverse tonight's setback when the local government bill goes to the Commons. But if the Lords persevere, they may be unable to secure a change in the law before the next election. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
Police in Greater Manchester are investigating the deaths of a further 39 of Dr. Harold Shipman's patients. He was convicted a week ago of murdering 15 women. The GP may now be linked to 175 deaths. A former Rwandan army colonel accused of war crimes has appeared before magistrates in London, where he denied taking part in genocide and acts of inhumanity. Tharsis Muvunyi is fighting attempts to extradite him to Rwanda. For the past 2 years, he's been living in southeast London. A university lecturer accused of spying for the East German Secret Service has been suspended from teaching for 18 months. Dr. Robin Pearson has been suspended on reduced pay after an internal investigation by Hull University. A BBC documentary last year accused him of spying for the Stasi for 12 years. The controversial leader of the Austrian right-wing Freedom Party, Jörg Haider, said today he hoped international uproar over his party's inclusion in government would calm down. He described himself as a moderate and said he had a lot in common with Tony Blair. Justin Webb is in Vienna and reports now on why Haider has struck a chord among some Austrian voters.
He doesn't look like a Nazi thug. He and his supporters, out enjoying themselves this weekend, have convinced many Austrians that they are decent people who will govern well. Mr. Haider compares himself not to Hitler, but to Tony Blair. He did it again today.
If you compare our program with the program of Tony Blair, you will find a lot of similarities.
What Mr. Haider seems to mean is that he's a reformer. Austria is a rich country. Life here is very comfortable for most people. But beneath the surface, there's been a price to pay. Austria's post-war stability was achieved by giving the two main political parties a huge influence over national life, a system of patronage that goes well beyond the world of normal politics. Dr. Mustafa El-Telbi is a gynecologist practicing in Vienna. Though he's an immigrant to Austria, a foreigner in many of his patients' eyes, he backs Mr. Haider. Why? Because Haider is committed to abolish the patronage system that Dr. El-Telbi feels holds him back.
Public posts are given on the basis of partisan affiliation. If somebody has the right political party support, he gets the job.
Another Haider supporter says the commitment to take politics out of daily life has an appeal that cuts right across Austrian society. Haider's the first Austrian politician in recent years to take note of what the people want.
He goes to the people, but the others don't do. He talks to the people, but the others don't do. He listens to the people. If you observe him, he is an endless listener. People have the feeling he's our man.
The fact is, though, that many of the well-heeled coffee house set were perfectly happy until Mr. Haider told them they shouldn't be. His real achievement, say his opponents, has been to create an imaginary threat.
Austria is the sixth richest country in the world and has a extremely low unemployment and also low inflation. But sort of the construction was unemployment will come and the foreigners are guilty.
But as Haider's party prepares to walk the corridors of power, it's a fact that they're expected to deliver more than racial hatred.
It's too simple to dismiss Jörg Haider as an extremist and nothing more. Many of his supporters genuinely believe that he can reinvigorate this country and sweep away a political system they're heartily sick of. Extraordinary as it might seem, they see him as a reformer. Justin Webb, BBC News, Vienna.
The Yugoslav defense minister has been shot dead in Belgrade. Pavle Bulatovic is thought to have been shot in a restaurant in the Belgrade suburb of Banjica. 2 other people were injured in the attack. The man brought in to rescue the Millennium Dome has promised to make it the hottest ticket in town. But Pierre-Yves Gerbeau, who used to work for Disneyland Paris, has ruled out major changes to the content. And in a memo to staff, the former chief executive, Jenny Page, has spoken of her bitterness at the criticism of the Dome when she said they most needed support and encouragement.
A new week, a new chief executive and a new search for favourable headlines. There was a determination that this photo call would be free of controversy. At a safe distance, all smiles, the man from the Magic Kingdom who may need his own brand of magic if he is to bring about a reversal of fortune at Greenwich. Despite his pedigree, Pierre-Yves Gerbeau says Disneyfying the Dome is not the solution.
I think it has nothing to do with a Disney theme park, apart maybe from the magic it brings. But I mean, this is a totally different product. I think this is, for me, a fantastic achievement, and for me it is what the 21st century has to offer.
Promoted 5 times in 9 years with Disney, Monsieur Gerbeau has been credited with helping to rescue the once ailing theme park. But today his ex-colleagues expressed surprise at that suggestion. He's remembered not as a rescuer, but merely as a senior manager who ran day-to-day operations. Nevertheless, his arrival will satisfy sponsors on this side of the channel, dismayed at weeks of bad publicity.
What we really need is the Dome to have a period of calm. He needs to enthuse the people down there. There's some fantastic people working at Greenwich, but I think they've taken a bit of a knock over recent weeks, and he needs to inject some confidence. And we need the thing to hang together as a really great visitor attraction.
Monsieur Gerbeau's options are said to include a revised pricing scheme and the provision of white-knuckle rides outside the Dome. The need for urgent remedies underlined in a final memo from his predecessor. Jenny Page told staff, "The early weeks of 2000 have left us cruelly exposed to criticism and doubt when we most needed encouragement." As the last visitors left here this evening, Monsieur Gerbeau was completing a series of meetings with the sponsors who demanded change and the executives who must implement that change. The reshaping of management has already begun. Monsieur Gerbeau claims he can create the hottest ticket in London, but he has just 11 months to meet that challenge. Robert Hall, BBC News, Greenwich.
A year ago today, Crown Prince Abdullah, the eldest son of Jordan's King Hussein, came to the throne after his father's death from cancer. The 38-year-old had been pursuing a career in the army, but now leads a nation that has a key role in brokering a lasting peace in the Middle East. In an interview to mark the first year of his rule, King Abdullah has been speaking to our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, in the capital, Amman, about his hopes for Jordan's future.
A year ago, there was a lot of quiet anxiety here. In place of the hugely experienced King Hussein, there was a 37-year-old unknown quantity, a half-English career soldier. And yet it's been a pretty good first year. King Abdullah has held on to his initial popularity, partly because he's taken to going out in disguise, seeing for himself what people's problems are. And Jordan's economy, though not strong, hasn't done too badly. But for the new king and his family, it's been a huge personal upheaval.
It's been a 180-degree change. I like to think, a pretty easy life when I was in the army. I knew what needed to be done. I knew the way my career was going to go, what effect it would have on my future. I had a private life, one that is no longer so. I have a wife and 2 children, but now I have a family of close to 5 million.
We turned to the beleaguered peace process. Israelis had come to think of Jordan as a friend, and yet the king hadn't set foot in Israel in his entire first year. Was he making the point that his sympathies lay on the Arab side of the line?
Not at all. I want to have a very good relationship with Israel, but it's also very, very important for me to have my traditional relationship with Arab countries. And there were some circles in Israel that were worried about this. They looked at Jordan as being a country, to an extent, maybe being subservient to Israel, which I didn't think was the proper outlook. And my question was at that time, do you want a weak neighbor or a strong friend?
Tell me a little bit about these trips around the place that you've been taking in disguise. You clearly enjoyed it hugely, but was there a serious effect of it, or was it a bit of theatre on your part?
Obviously, in this particular position, the greatest fear that I had is of being isolated. So going out in disguise was really to be able to keep that link that I've had previously. It's not good enough for me to call up members of the government and say, I've been told by so-and-so that there's a problem there, because people would think, well, I don't know how realistic that is. So I want to be able to confirm what goes on. It has given people in the civil service the inspiration to do the right thing.
Because they think you may be walking in the door.
Exactly. So in a way, they treat, I hope, they begin to treat every citizen as the king, because they don't know when the king is going to appear next. And it's taken a life of its own. I sort of joke it's a bit like Elvis. There's sightings all over the country on things, and therefore
all this energy and enthusiasm may not go down too well with the instinctively conservative system here. But already the king's finding it hard to change things as fast as he'd like. But there's no doubt about it, he's made an impressive start. John Simpson, BBC News, Amman.
Back now to our main story, the hijacked Afghan airliner at Stansted Airport. While we've been on air, Essex Police have been holding a news conference. Our chief news correspondent, Kate Adie, joins me from there. Kate, what did the police have to say?
They said that this situation may continue for some time. Indeed, they mentioned the possibility of days of negotiations. What's interesting is what hasn't been said. There is no clear idea why these people can't just get off the plane. Are they being threatened? Are people holding guns to their heads? We have no ideas. And we also don't know what the demands are. Are they of a political nature or a practical nature? We just don't know. We only know that there is communication still with the plane, and that at least some of the worst conditions are being slightly alleviated by what can be being sent on board to these people who are undergoing a rather unpleasant ordeal.
Kate, a long haul, as you've said, but from what you can see, it's all being done fairly calmly, the talking.
Outwardly it looks quiet, but we just don't know. We don't know what the atmosphere is on board, inside. Outwardly, we are at distance. This plane is isolated. We don't know what is going on under the surface. I am afraid it is going to be a long haul for everyone to see what the outcome is and what the real story is.
Thank you, Kate Adie at Stansted Airport. And there's continuing coverage of the events at Stansted on News 24 throughout the night. That's the latest from the BBC Newsroom this evening. Good night.
Good evening. There's to be an independent inquiry into the use of fingerprint evidence in Scotland. It follows a trial in which a former police officer was charged with perjury but eventually cleared. Since then, fingerprint experts have accused the Scottish Criminal Records Office of gross incompetence.
Shirley McKee was cleared of perjury by a jury, which rejected SCRO evidence that her thumbprint had been found at the scene of a murder. A BBC Scotland Frontline investigation backed the trial verdict. 5 independent fingerprint experts claimed that Shirley McKee's fingerprint did not match the SCRO evidence. In a letter to the Minister for Justice and the Lord Advocate, 14 fingerprint experts at Lothian and Borders Police called for an independent inquiry into the SCRO handling of the case. The SCRO's Executive Committee has now invited Scotland's Chief Inspector of Constabulary, William Taylor, to conduct an independent assessment into the fingerprint evidence presented in Shirley McKee's trial.
And everybody would agree that it needs to be something in his hands that would have credibility and would be accepted by the public in due course.
The inquiry had been recommended by Scotland's Chief Constables. And this evening, BBC Scotland has learned that Shirley McKee's family has received a letter from somebody involved in the murder investigation which led to her perjury charge. The letter writer, expressing concern, says Miss McKee was set up to take a fall.
Research suggests that gay men in Edinburgh are 4 times more likely to be victims of violence than heterosexuals. The study, commissioned by the former Scottish Office, found a quarter of the 246 men interviewed had been attacked in the last year. The homosexual rights group, the Equality Network, has argued that the findings underline the need to repeal Section 28. A new charity has been set up to help children who've been victims of abuse in Scotland. The Moira Anderson Foundation is named after a 12-year-old girl from Coatbridge who disappeared 43 years ago running a message for her grandmother. The charity's founder is Sandra Brown, who claims her father had a hand in Moira's disappearance.
It will be about stopping children vanishing from our communities without trace, children and young people. But a central aim, as well as thinking about personal safety of young children, is we're thinking of assisting people who are going through the legal process. It's a very fraught route and people need wraparound support.
The first of NatWest's largest shareholders has indicated it will support the Bank of Scotland's bid for the English bank. Until now, only a few smaller fund managers had gone public with their voting intentions. Phillips & Drew is one of NatWest's 5 largest shareholders, whose votes will be crucial in deciding the outcome. All 3 banks have just 2 days left to win shareholders' support. That's it from us this evening. Our next update is on BBC 2 Scotland in Newsnight Scotland at 11. Good night.